First, I want to thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Barbie Bagahan. Thank you for the warm welcoming. It's good to be back in Riga. My presentation will be a little bit more from the results of the new historical research, and it's about the Nazi Oblivion Project, Aktion 1005. My presentation will have two parts. In the first part, I want to talk a little bit more generally about Aktion 1005. In the second part, I want to spot what will be happened in Latvia. Okay, here we go. Aktion 1005. This presentation examines one of the most significant and least known operations in the history of the Third Reich, a regime that already had plenty of other secrets to keep, including the extermination of European Jews, the systematic persecution of political dissidents, the mass murder of Poles, downplayed as a simple fight amongst ethnic minorities, the campaign against antisocial elements, the liquidation of the Roma, the euthanasia program, to medically eliminated handicapped people, the killing of war prisoners, and the burning of towns and villages. The German dictatorship applied a strictly secrecy policy to the most of these things, but one undertaking was handled with the utmost of security precautions, Aktion 1005 or Operation 1005. It was so secret that even this code name offered no semantic clues to the uninformed. Code words like euthanasia or Aktion Reinhardt might have triggered mental association, but what is about Operation 1005? What could this signify? Nonetheless, Operation 1005 was not only one of the most secret, but also one of the most gruesome projects undertaken by the elite of German mass murderers, at least under the domain of Himmler and Heydrich. The major undertaking had two components: Aktion 1005, which took place in all the extermination camps of the Third Reich, and the Mobile Sonderkommando 1005, Special Commando 1005, which will be examined more in detail here. Operation 1005 was the code name for the clearance of all mass graves in an attempt to erase evidence of genocidal crimes behind the frontier of the German Reich. It is not known exactly. The leading officials of the Third Reich decided to have the burial sites completely and systematically removed. Previous history so provide clear harbingers in terms of forerunners or test runs. This particle applies to the euthanasia program. A concerned consummate is already reflected in orders and used in the late 1940s, which prohibit the explicit telegraphic transmission of exact execution figures, banned the relevant photography, and called for the increased use of secret code even in internal communications. However, the existence of corpses and mass graves could not be resolved just with a simple command. To carry out Enterdung, a German term, a jargonistic word, but meaning de-earthing, at every gravesite seemed so absurd, especially since there were so many sites whose exact positions had already been forgotten by the murderers, and nobody knew how to best execute this order anyway. Burning the official documents was not a problem, but excavating the necropolises of terror was another matter altogether. In any event, the operation was ultimately assigned to SS Standartenführer Paul Blobe, the former head of Special Command 4A, who is also infamous for organization at the biggest massacre at Babi Yar during the Eastern Campaign, where exactly 33,771 people were murdered, including men and women, seniors and children, and even babies. Rubel took leave his old unit on March 24, 1942, and Operation 1005 must begin not later than then. As anyone knows today from the internet A subsidious code name can quickly provide awkward associations. So in order to keep this operation is a secret, it was simply named after a file number at the Gestapo office in der Reichssicherheitshauptamt, Reichssecurity Main Office. Operation 1005 was launched even though the Third Reich was still at the peak of its power in the spring of 1942, with the following factors being the most likely triggers. First, the declaration of St. James Palace concerning the punishment of war criminals. Second, the temporary recapture of Kharkov, Rostov and Don and other cities with high casualties, which made the Soviet cognizant of the German war crimes committed there. And third, in March 1942, arrival in London details report from the Warthegau concerning the Chelmo extermination camp, which may have been the most important factor. Having assigned to this task, Blobel probably met his boss, Reinhard Heydrich, in Warsaw to end the March of 1942. From there, Blobel went to Berlin, where he received further details on his sinister new assignment from SS-Gruppenführer Heinrich Müller, who was head of the Gestapo of the RSR. This constellation, Heydrich, Müller, Blobel, and under the ultimate supervision of Himmler, is itself rather interesting because it considerably increased the importance of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt in this international power struggle with the SS about who was in charge of the exterminating the Jews. Himmler gave Blobel a special pass, granting him every possible help. He could override command hierarchies. Blobel was thus in a position where he could lean on both the SS and the police forces for support. Still, his operation was still in an embryonic stage. He had neither a team or an office, and above no technical knowledge about how to clear a mass grave. So he had to do a lot of research. In Berlin, he visited at the Gracious Wannsee district while he studying the files of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, especially these from Eichmann's department, in order to gather information about the location of the mass graves and the number of the people who were murdered there. Apart from that, he also traveled to Lodz, Litzmannstadt in German language, the capital of the Warthegau and site of a major ghetto, where he took a room at the General Litzmann House, guest house, in early summer 1942. From there, he regularly visited Chelmo extermination camp, where his plan was to have the first corpses exhumed in order to develop a feasible method for disposing of them without any traces. Chelmo was thus placed to start fulfilling his assignment while also testing out techniques for doing so. There was a comradely competition between two teams searching for the best procedure. One consisted of Blobel and his associates, while the other one, headed by SS Hauptsturmführer Hans Botmann, the command of the Chelmo extermination camp. Both Blobel and Botmann considered themselves as specialists and seemed to heave each other on as rivals, despite their clear difference in rank. Blobel ordered experiments to open grave sites to see whether it is possible to simply burn corpses inside a mass grave without first moving them to another grave. In July 1942, he received 3 flamethrowers, 1 flamethrower recharging wagon, protective clothing, and various additional implements from the stock of the Wehrmacht Armaments Department. There were also an interest demand for chlorine to be used for disinfection. For an example, in late March 1942, before the beginning of 1005, the Copernicus pharmacy in Poland disposed just 1,640 kilograms of chlorine bleaching powder, but late June saw the arrival of 13 tons delivery. In any case, Blobel was unsuccessful in his attempts to incinerate corpses inside open gravesites without first extracting them. Meanwhile, the other guy, Bosman, ordered incendiary bombs phosphor bomb for Chelmo camp, which provided a devastating. A controlled destruction of the corpse was not possible with them. The effect of the bombs was so strong that they caused a forest fire, which of course ran contrary to the goal of strict secrecy, so local inhabitants were bound to notice these fires eventually. A German guard would later testify the activities that took at the place there. In summer 1942, they started opening the gravesite and burning the corpses. In this regard, I would like to describe my observation as one of the mass graves during an assignment in the summer of 1942. Blood or a similar liquid was sputtering in 6 streams from several places in this grave and was forming big puddles near it. It was unaware of the reason for what was happening. Shortly afterward, the graves had to be opened by a Jewish commando. In the meantime, 3 or 4 pits measuring 5 meters in the length, 5 meters in the width, and 3 meters in the depth had already been excavated. Those corpses that had been hauled out of the mass graves were then stacked into these new graves, sprinkled with the powder and set on fire. At this point, I do not want to negligent mentioning that I watched the starving Jews assigned to this mass grave eat parts of the corpses they just had taken out of the graves. This testimony comes from a German court transcription. There are no statements from Jewish survivors at this period of the ghetto and of Chelmo. But even if they exist for discussion, no words could ever do justice to the events that happened there or suffering of the victims. An appropriate or language for Operation 1005, a crime behind all experiments and imagination, has yet to be worked out. At this juncture, it's enough to know that after much experimentation, the murderly findings succeed in developing the right incineration method. Funeral pyres on grids made either of steel girders or ideally railway tracks. The bodies, partly decayed, sometimes recognizable as an individual, were put out of these grids, doused with oil and fuel, and set it alight. It many well that the prisoners discovered their own missing friends and relatives, who were then dragged on the special hooks to the funeral pyres in order to be stacked up in a pyramid shape. In 1943, Blobel's team managed to stack 2,000 bodies on a single funeral pyre. The crucial fact is that Blobel was ultimately successful in eliminating all the corpses of an extermination camp, leaving no residues. When necessary, bone fragments were pounded by motors or crushed by machinery, such as cement mixers or industrial coffee grinders, to produce bone meal, which was then used as fertilizer or simply thrown into a river. Blobel's work into Chelmo was finished by the end of 1942, but the procedure that was developed there would then be used at the extermination camps of the Operation Reinhardt, the camps of the East, the burial grounds of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Bunker 1 and 2, and against in Chelmo after the second opening in 1944. But the Nazi regime also needed to deal with the mass graves and the forest execution sites where the victims of its mobile commando units lay buried. The main fields of this action for Operation 1005 still loomed in the eastern and southeastern Europe, particularly in the occupied territories of the Soviet Union, but also in the General Government territory of occupied Poland and as well in Serbia. Sonderkommando 1005. With the German defeat at Stalingrad, Blobel was immediately posted to the east. This urgency mainly triggered by the Soviet Union propaganda offensive after its extraordinary state commission published the discovery of mass grave containing 20,000 corpses on Rostov-on-Don. Goebbels issued an order, the propaganda minister, no react to this information. But Blobel's job was to make sure that this not what will happen again. This let him establish two subunits of Sonderkommando 1005, number A and number B. The former assignment was to the General Commissariat of Kiev, while the later assigned to the General Commissar of Dnipropetrovsk. Other subunits were also established. Sonderkommando 1005 Mitte, or center, or it's the same that Sonderkommando 1005C for Central Russia and Belarus, and the well largely unknown Special Commando 1000D and E for the Northern Territories, particularly Lithuania and Latvia. But these units were certainly not capital to clearing the huge number of graves and burning all the corpses by themselves. Therefore, also local Gestapo posts were also asked to establish their own Operation 1005 commanders in order to help unburden their specialist comrades. Furthermore, Blobel issued a general order in 1943 that prohibited the creation of new grave sites. Instead, corpses were to be cremated immediately after executions. Now I want to take to the second part about what will be happening in Latvia. It's possible to get water? It's hard to define it's hard to define a precise date for the launch of Operation 1005 in Riga, as well in Latvia general. However, the corresponding preparation in terms of materials and logistics can be tracked in the summer of 1943. It was at this point at the administration of the Reichskommissariat Ostland, especially its Department of Domestic Trade, which was in charge of trade goods, received an order to set aside combustible fuels. The appropriated tools also need to be delivered on time, along with the screening walls that would later shield so-called the construction sites, that nobody from outside can see what will be happening behind this. Constructed from the outside view. In contrast to other deployments of Operation 1005, Riga local KDS, or district commander of the Gestapo and the SD, had already had an advanced commando in place since early 1942, with sole responsibility consists of excavating and preparing the pits, performing hygienic operations and camouflaging the grave sites. This was the so-called Hochwaldkommando, meaning High Forest Commando, otherwise known as Krause I, Special Commando. With the dissolution of the Riga Ghetto, which began on August 1943 and ended on November 2nd, and the subsequent integration of its work into the Kaiserwald concentration camp system, global plans also entered a new phase in which the Länder workshop complex began sending work details to the Stützpunkt, or Base Camp 1005 Commando, located in a nearby forest. This was a site from which none one of the prisoners returned. Thanks. After the establishment of the main camp at Kaiserwald, the camp administration under its command SS Sturmbannführer Albert Sauer began conducting much feared Appelle, or roll calls, starting in late 1943, early 1944, during which prisoners were appointed to the base camp special commander, with longer irregular intervals at first, and which then become shorter and shorter in the summer of 1944. The selections generally assembled groups of 15 to 30 men, mostly young and strong. Behind the age group and physical conditions, no pattern could be seen as to why these particular individuals were chosen for the base camp, at least not by the remaining inmates. Sometimes the roll call involved stepping forward to be inspected one by one, and sometimes there were prepared lists were simply read aloud. Some of the selected been accused of misconduct, so they were punished with a transfer from the camp to the base camp. Conversely, Sauer sometimes looked for volunteers, recruiting men by offering attractive promises, naturally without wasting a word on the fact that after the completion of this work assignment, it was death that awaited these prisoners. In this context, it is important to note the twofold intention of the murderers of overseas and the difference between sick, completely exiled prisoners and younger, strong men. The former were be executed on the site before the bodies were burned with further ado, and the latter were to do disposal work. The base camp was a solution to both endeavors. In principle, this methodical procedure was no different from the three-step process of using members of the US Special Command at the gas chambers at Birkenau. First, the prisoners' labor was exploited until body and spirit were completely exhausted and broken. Second, the prisoners was murdered since no more labor or productive or economic value would be extracted. And then third, the body was immediately incinerated. As a result of this mythology, hundreds of men were made to disappear at the Kaiserwald concentration camp alone. There is a testimony that women were also selected for the base camp, which was additionally known as the Himmelfahrtskommando or Ascension Commando. Furthermore, there were two independent commanders in Salaspils, each having 70 persons which were permanently at Bowel's disposal for the implementation of Operation 1005. Salaspils must have been also been the home of the local supply depot, perhaps of the depot for the whole 1005 operation in Latvia, where the operation stores gasoline and tar along with special tools, including the infamous Korbsfuchs, which was a very special tool to throw the bodies into the fire. By all experience of a division of responsibilities would begin in the spring of 1944, with the incinerations in the immediate vicinity of Riga to be handled by Special Command 1005E under the command of Kurt Roschmann, while its sister troop 1000D ranged further afield. By the autumn of 1943, the operation was still in the early stages. This period saw the first variable development of Global Special Commando, charged with eliminating the bodies of people making murder during the ghetto liquidation of November 2, 1943. Most of the last internists were transported to Auschwitz, but not the sickly, not children or their mothers. They were sent to disappear at an unknown location. Meanwhile, a clean-up commando was left behind to cleanse the ghetto site at the Maskawasas Vorstadt district before it was returned to the Riga municipal administration. Incinerations also took place at the vicinity of Salaspils, but also instead of the excavation of the old mass graves, also made impractical by onset of winter. This involves the disposal of the corpses produced by an action to be conducted in that town. Just like at the Riga ghetto, Riga Central Prison and also need to be cleared, which means eliminating the political prisoners that were held there. These delinquents were removed from their cells and grouped to be driven in the direction of Salaspils. Finally, in a nearby woodland, their journey ended with deadly shots. And in addition, starting the summer of 1944, prisoners were taken from the local Stalag to Salaspils. Stalag means Soviet prison camp for Soviet prisoners, which were murdered alongside immigrants who also were unfit for work. Immediately afterwards, the Germans burned the vestiges of their crimes. This was continually repeated procedure. Also, the final number of victims may be unknown. So much for the elimination of bodies, which the perpetrators called in German terms frische Leichen or fresh corpses. In contrast, preparations for a major deployment of Operating 1005, covering all of Latvia, were delayed by the winter conditions until early March 1944. This was some 60 SS members and police officers, mostly from Riga, regular city police, but also a few rural officers who were summoned to Riga's House of Livonian Noble Corporation, Riga Ritterhaus, by Friedrich Jäckeln, the regional high SS and police leader. There he relieved the men gathered in the hall and that they have known to be assigned to a special commander. The assembled policemen then were divided into two groups for a newly established commandos of Operation 1005. One commando, 1005D, under the command of Kurt Krause, was assigned to Latgalia. And the first deployment was in Daugavpils, significant as the regional center of Latgalia and the second largest city in Latvia. As a result, Krause left the 1005 camp in Salaspils and traveled in company of his superior Blobel to the KDS field office and located there. The incinerations near Daugavpils, at the mass grave at the Pogolinka woods, near the resort of, I hope I pronounce it well, Meshems, about 6 kilometers from the city, began in March 1944 and lasted for several weeks. The prisoner commander consisted mostly of captives from the Red Army, along with French prisoners of war. There were at last 30 men who had been evaluated by the local KDS office. At the end of each day, they were crammed into a trailer that had been converted into a mobile jail, which took them to each particular work site. No matter where they were excavated, they were always met with the same harrowing, stomach-turning sight in the depths of the earth. They found a tangle of bodies, all pressed flat. It was no longer possible to tell if they were men, women, or children. Using special hooks originally developed at the Babi Yar, the prison pulled the bodies from the ground, stacked up them, and burned them. According to one statement, depending on the size of the excavation site, we might stay for 1 day or several days. In April, they received to be the order to push onward to the second, apparently without having finishing removing all the graves in Daugavpils, particularly those of the killed Red Army soldiers. It appears that one Special Commando 1005D was also responsible for disposing them of the mass graves in Kruspils in the order of between Latgalia and Semgalia. After Latgalia was abandoned, it could be that the next excitement was Lipeia on the east coast. In any case, it was there that Krause fell into clutches of partisans, now appearing a broken man in the eyes of the former ghetto interns who saw him there. According to testimony, the partisans brutally abused Krause before killing him. In Lipeia itself, the mass graves on the beach must have already been excavated sometimes between April and August 1944 by a local 1005 troop under the command of Wilhelm Temple. Meanwhile, the parallel deployments of 1005E at last known of all. The only certainty would seem that it opened in the Riga, that will be operated in the Riga region. According to one rural policeman whose memories were sometimes imprecise, the commander conducted excavations in a minimum of 10 locations, but it could have been more. And he rotated through a perimeter was at last 20 or 30 kilometers away from Riga, maybe more. Each weather station, this was also a code name for gravesite, needed for 1 or 2 weeks. In violation of Blobel's earliest instructions, the troop kept a permanent work commando with us until the very end, since they made no sense to kill trained prisoners, in any case, no right away. They consisted of some 20 Jews who were either German or German-speaking, or at the last, the great majority of them. As a result, the borrowed guards would occasionally chat with their Czech compatriots about their old homeland. But whoever failed to do the line or otherwise stood out during an official inspection was simply taken aside and executed. The leader of the Special Command 1005E had precise notes and maps concerning the location of the mass graves. After finishing his works around Riga, 1005E acted henceforth as a traveling commando uprooted from its fixed base, with a primary focus on processing localities that were situated in a wider radius from Riga. The graves were mostly located in the nearby fields after taking several days to eliminate a weather station. The caravan would then move on to the next locality. This unit may be also been responsible for the incinerations at the Drælini forest, located some 5 or 7 kilometers east of Riga, as well for the Deportations forest, and site farther and farther away from what was the capital of the Reichskommissariat Ostland. The only certainty is that the final deployment would be later in Jelgava. It was clear that these two 1005 teams were quickly overwhelmed with their work in Latvia, which is they needed reinforcements. Therefore, the men of 1005B, one of these units which were served before in Babia, who had previously been on the deployment in the Ukraine, depart from a vacation resort on Easter Sunday, April 9, 1944, and board a train that would take them 1,000 kilometers from the north. Then they took up quarters in Salaspils. It was not until the late April that Special Command 1005B began its actual work, starting in the mass grave of Rumbula. There, the incineration continued until June 1944, and all the excavated pits were finally refilled and smoothed out. The stench gradually faded, and where the murdered had previously lain, there now stood young pine trees surrounded by new grass. The next stop for the 1005 was the pits at Bikaniki Forest, the other major mass murder site in Riga, which included two separate main areas. The first consisted of 6 or 7 men graves, whose removal lasted from the mid-June to the late June 1944, accomplishment by 60 prisoners that had been assigned to work at the base commando. The number of excavated bodies is estimated to have been from 10 to 12,000. After that, Special Command 1005B moved to the second burial area in the forest. Here, it would excavate and destroy at least 10,000 bodies, possible even 20,000. It continued its work until mid-September in a routine and methodical way. Dig up, pull out, drag away, build a funeral pyre, stack the bodies, dose of it full, burn completely, crush the bones, scatter the ashes. As they continued retreat from the advancing Red Army, they began their final job with the examinations at Kaiserwald. Some 50 prisoners marked for death were forced to excavate about 20,000 corpses in the immediate vicinity of the concentration camps. At the same time that the surrounding grass graves were being eliminated, the systematic evacuation of the camp itself began on August 6, 1944, with 15,000 inmates destined for Stutthof near Danzig. In late September, Special Command 1005B was forced to abandon its cover-up operations at Kaiserwald, as Riga could no longer be held. All the prisoners were left behind at the burn site, executed with a shot through the back of the head. The murderers had to reach the waiting transport ship as quickly as possible. For the men of Operation 1005, Danzig represented a true safe haven. From there, Blobel had them transferred them to the so-called Ostmark, formerly Austria, where they could be incorporated into the Iltis Commando. In the late summer of 1994, it was also time for the members of the Special Command 1005E to disappear, and they reached Salzburg without major incident. The murders made itself in time, and even decades later, none of these SS men who conducted Operation 1005 in Latvia was ever prosecuted for their crimes in the court of the Federal Republic in Germany. In fact, there was no vital interest in pursuing a comprehensive resolution of these crimes. And this makes us sad, sleepless, and also angry. Thank you for listening. Yeah.